as a culture that, you know, we just have to be careful about the levels of dissonance we apply to certain songs, and maybe just kind of either use that for personal or go to a place where we can actually do that stuff. You know,
if we just go by that initial trend that we see, I actually see some places where, hey, it's going to be easier in the next couple of years to start putting some more gospel passing chords and these ideas back into like the dominant music, right?
If you look at just about almost every Western music style, the musician playing or doing, or the producer doing it, can be directly linked to gospel music.
You know, one of the things I was thinking about, though, is that it's important for us to know and understand our audience as musicians. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is to always know who we're playing for and the context. So, case in point, I did a wedding 2 or 3 weeks ago. It was at the beginning of September. So, yeah, it was about a couple of weeks ago. I did a wedding, and the girl who had the wedding wanted an R&B style for the wedding. Uh-huh. So you're talking Chrisette Michelle, you know, those kind of things, piano string type music. And I know as a musician that I'm not using a lot of dominant 7 flat 9s, and it's just out of context. It's just not gonna work. But that doesn't mean I can't improv. That doesn't mean that the need for the stuff that we're all teaching on our channels, on our channels, isn't coming into play. It's just knowing when and what to do, knowing our audience and knowing when. I think the problem with musicians is that they lack the understanding of when to use certain things, and how, and what audience and what target audience is necessary for that. So that's what's going to make us good musicians. I have a church, a Baptist church, a white Baptist church I played for. They love me to this day because I wasn't throwing dominant chords at them all the time, right? But it doesn't mean that I wasn't improvising. They love my improvising, but my improvising was in the context of what they appreciated. It wasn't even necessarily the stuff that I teach on my channel because it was different. Right. But, you know, I like classical. So I would do classical improv. And every once in a while I would throw in a little gospel chord and just chuckle to myself, kind of a thing. But, you know, they love me because it was 1%. You understand what I'm saying? If I try to come in there and do 50% gospel, I wouldn't have lasted. And so I really think there is a need for the passing chords. There is a need for all of that. But we do have to understand how, and that's actually the most difficult part. Somebody come and watch one of our channels, but now the question is where? And, you know, to somebody watching, you may not be able to use it at your current church. As much as you love this idea, your current church may not be the place to use it, and it may not be appreciated. And so they fight about the fact that people don't appreciate it. But in reality, you're out of context. You don't understand the format and in terms of where you can use it. So I think that's really what this is, Warren. I know it's kind of going out there a little bit, but that's kind of what I was thinking.
This is pretty cool. So in other words, also, because music, gospel or Christian music, church music, has somehow simplified over the past decade, the challenge has been greater now for musicians in, okay, I still want to retain this harmonic knowledge, but I got to now be very decisive as to how I'm going to incorporate this without changing the context of this song.
And Corey does this well on his channel, I feel, in terms of levels of dissonance, because there's acceptable levels of dissonance within each congregation. And so depending on your congregation, I kind of already know, like for me, intuitively, I know how much dissonance I can bring. And I'm calling it dissonance as opposed to harmonic passing chords, because really that's kind of when things go too dissonant for your listener, they kind of they can't understand it, right? I mean, there's some jazz tunes for me that they're so dissonant. It's like, I can't, I'm like, man, this person, it almost like I can't enjoy it anymore. But but there's an audience for that. You understand what I'm saying? Like, that definitely understands it. So that's what I mean. So it's some of these things, if we're moving to that direction, Warren, and we're moving to this way as a culture, that, we just have to be careful about the levels of dissonance we apply to certain songs and to maybe just kind of either use that for personal or go to a place where we can actually do that stuff. It's kind of what I'm thinking.
So, David, for a guy who's been walking that thin line for a minute, the gospel CCM, who also is pretty versed in the knowledge of passing chords, how do you swing it? You'd be the perfect case study for a lot of the students who plays in a predominantly CCM-driven church and trying to figure out how to blend the two in a nice way.
Yeah. So your question is there going to be a need to learn gospel in the future, right?
Or basically the gospel concepts, a lot of the reharm and passing chord concepts.
I think of gospel as I would put gospel up there in terms of as a higher level music subject that people should learn. So I would put gospel up there with jazz. I would put gospel up there with classical music. I think we should all learn the concepts within it. We should study it. I think gospel really developed it. I use the streets, not necessarily in the classroom, but still it's higher level knowledge, right? And so I think those concepts will always be with us. They'll always last. Like, they're going to be like higher level, like people are going to always return to those types of things. I think what's going to happen is they're going to start to look different. I remember when I was in college and Ty Tribbett came out, and I remember, actually it wasn't in college. He came out in 2004, but 2008 is when the second album came out. And I remember people saying at the time, Spanky's drumming was too busy. Like, this is unacceptable for church. Now, when I go back and listen to the album, it sounds basic. It sounds like it sounds like
right.
Compared to what the cats are doing now.
It's like that's what you must do to get a job, right? And so, I say what I'm saying. My point with that is music changes, and so let's talk about the application for it in regards to the general church music. I see a huge shift coming in church music soon. If you go and listen to the dominant players, they all have some element of a gospel sound. It may be a weak gospel sound, but it's a gospel sound on some of their records. And so if we just go by that initial trend that we see, I actually see some places where, hey, it's going to be easier in the next couple of years to start putting some more gospel passing chords and these ideas back into like the dominant music, right? And so I certainly think it's going to have there's going to be even more of a place for it in the future. In terms of how I do it now, honestly, frankly, it's a struggle. And a lot of times, I don't even play that much, by the way. I'm fortunate that I'm just more of a director here. But when I am playing, I have to really think about what Sean was talking about. Like, where am I gonna give them a touch of me, you know? And I was playing one time, and I like it when they ask me to play and it's just me and a singer, because then I'm the most freest person in the world, right? Whatever I want to do. And so our church had I don't want to say a convention, but a conference where they called all these different major children's leaders for it, and we a group at our church led worship for it, and I played piano. And somebody comes up to me from I think it was Brenton Baptist Church, a huge Baptist church out there, and he's like, "Man, I've not heard anybody play piano like you. Like, I know all these other piano players, but you sound different, and I can't put my finger on what it is." And I knew exactly what it was, right? I was just putting a little touch of flavor.
You're like, you're hearing the gospel, son.
But what it is I think there's a maturity with that, in that, and it's like with anybody learning a language, when you want to become better at a language, it seems like you're trying to mimic everything you hear, and you're trying to use more advanced words. You ever heard a kid using advanced words and they don't really know how to use these words yet? But over time, they're going to learn, okay, this is the proper context for using these words, right? And I think especially somebody like Sean and Corey, they understand these concepts so well that they can look at almost probably any piece of music and say, okay, a gospel idea can fit there, a gospel idea can fit there, a gospel idea can fit there. And I think learning that only comes with maturity. It's not going to come at the early levels of trying to study this genre of music. It's going to come later on when you can look at any piece of music, a classical piece of music, and say, okay, this gospel idea can fit in there. So that's I felt like a long answer, but
pretty concise to me. It's very clear. I like it, so basically, one of the takeaways that I got from you is you think in the future, it's going to be a lot easier to re-implement some of the struggles now we're currently having with CCM.
Yeah, I certainly think it's going to move. You're going to see an R&B-ish pop blending in the CCM world somehow.
There was something he said that really had me thinking too, when you said that you're hearing a lot of dominant players infuse some gospel, and I think I've noticed that too. Even if you look at your Jacob Colliers, and some of your well-known musicians are now using like your gospel, just more of a gospel sound. So while at some level, we're seeing maybe some departure within the church, we're also seeing more acceptance. So again, this is to Corey's idea. We're also seeing a little bit more acceptance of that gospel sound, the unique thing that we have. Corey, a really large benefit to what he did is helping just really get that traditional gospel sound out to the masses. And it's accepted. And so I do think that there's going to be room for this. We don't all know how it's going to look. I think we're trying to figure out, but I don't think we actually know how it will look, what it looks like in 5 years or so. But I do, what you guys are saying, I do think that it's not going to die out. I think that sound, that gospel sound, is never going to complete, because it's just now being accepted, if anything. And so people are wanting that. I think there's always going to be room for our programs. I think there's always going to be room. And then when it comes out, all the people who have learned this stuff, then all of a sudden we seem like, oh man, but we've been doing this stuff for years. Like Corey Henry, like they're just now hearing him, but he's been doing that stuff for 20 years. So, I think there's a benefit in what we're doing. And right now, gospel is relatively small, in terms of just as a genre. It's a really, really small genre. But then as it infuses itself into different genres, it could be really large. It just doesn't have its own thing that's large. You know what I mean? It's just kind of.
And you say gospel is small. I never knew how small gospel was until I left the gospel world. And I realized, wow, most of the world, like this, you have to consider, okay, who are the people that this music belongs to, right? And we're only 13% of the population. It's not going to be everywhere like how we think it's supposed to be. And so, right. But I agree, it's going to be this infusion where it's going to be over here and over here and over here. Just like how I think what's happened to jazz. Like people might say jazz is dead, and I don't think jazz is dead. I just think jazz has morphed into a lot of other genres.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I I I I think that gospel music is a small community. However, if you look at just about almost every Western music style, the musician playing or doing or the producer doing it can be directly linked to gospel music, and I think that alone contributes to, hey, maybe like Johann Kim, for example, he's not going to be playing at the local church storefront church, but you can clearly hear in his playing that
He's
he is
absorbed a lot
studying
of this.
a lot of gospel. And I find this with a lot of musicians, and I'm sure all of us teach students who aren't. I have many students that aren't gospel students. Of course, I straddle two worlds, but I know many students that come to me wanting to learn gospel who aren't gospel musicians. They're jazz musicians that want to study gospel to bring that thing to their community. So although gospel music is a small subset of the population, our impact is much larger than we would imagine.